very rarely in life do you get that. You know, feed us. You know,
God of War was one of the most critically acclaimed games the industry has seen in a long time. From 2016's E3 conference all the way to its release, it had players in the palm of its hands.
Kratos!
By the time the game launched in April 2018, the game was everywhere. It was in every gaming magazine, it was the front page of every gaming related website, and it was even plastered all over city buses, train stations, and anything you can think of. And it had every right to be. The game was a commercial and critical smash, selling over 3.1 million copies in just 3 days, becoming the fastest selling PlayStation game they had ever had. And just over a year later, it hit over 10 million copies worldwide. It also got massively praised by game reviewers, with over 40 publications stating the game was a masterpiece, with almost all of them giving it a perfect score, making Cory Barlog, the creator, cry on camera.
It shouldn't matter, but I'm just so fucking proud.
And then after all that, it went on to win 21 Game of the Year awards.
And the game award for Game of the Year goes to God of War.
The game was a hit, and even to this day is regarded as one of the best games of all time. But it wasn't just a success commercially and critically. It also helped boost a franchise that was on the brink of becoming stale. It helped Santa Monica Studios feel revitalized after a rough few years, and it helped a beloved character become the face of PlayStation once again, giving him his own new catchphrase.
Boy.
But why was God of War such a masterpiece as everyone was saying? Why was it able to sell over 10 million copies, win Game of the Year left, right and centre, and how did it revitalise the God of War series? Well, welcome to WiseFish Gaming, and today we will be exploring one of gaming's greatest achievements, focusing on the change of Kratos and how it affected the storyline, the immersive world and the story that Santa Monica Studios had created, and the dramatic change in gameplay, all whilst asking the question, why was God of War a real game changer?
What do I want to say with this story? Yeah? What do you want to say with this story? What do you think? What do you think with this story? I think running away is what I want to say with this. Change is possible.
Rebooting a series is always a really risky thing to do, especially for a series that was so well loved by audiences all over the world. Kratos was a well loved character, but after Ascension it was clear that something needed to change. He was becoming extremely two-dimensional, and he didn't really have much going for him other than the fact that he was an angry individual who didn't take no for an answer, and his battle against anyone other than the gods just wasn't that fun. And saying that, with the gods of Olympia destroyed, something new needed to come out of the series, and something on a grand scale. So when Kratos got revealed at E3 in 2016 and his whole appearance had changed alongside his new mannerisms, it was clear that there was a new direction taking place. But there was so much more to this reboot than the appearance of Kratos. So many little factors changed that made this game outstanding, but all of them revolve around him as a character. But I will start with his design, because his design was certainly a fantastic change. It looked awesome and gave the team a chance to really show off their new technology with the implementation of a badass beard which graphically looked amazing. But they also made him look older. He looked extremely war-torn, and it just instantly gave players a time frame as to when this game was set. This now middle-aged, if not older, main character looked to have got to the point in his life where he just wanted to settle down and not be that soldier that he was in previous games, sort of like Thanos was at the end of Infinity War, for example. But this changing character was also done through the writing. Kratos was much more tame than he was in previous games, and he actually felt more like a blank slate. His dialogue, although it was brilliant at times, was extremely minimal at most points, and his emotional reaction to things was much less than before. It shows that he isn't that character anymore. He doesn't want to be angry or see hatred everywhere he goes. He just wants to live, and if that means protecting himself from threats, then he will use his skills to do so. In fact, for me, the whole game is actually a big metaphor for God of War's transition. There are so many symbolic scenes which show Kratos turning from the angry, hate-filled character of the first games to this mellow, quiet, semi-blank slate of a character who doesn't want to see or live his past anymore. And that to me is the real main story of the game. It's about accepting the past and moving on, and changing for the better. The first scene, or actually first moment in fact, shows Kratos cutting down a tree. Corey in the documentary about the game even stated that this moment was a metaphor for cutting down the past and burning it, moving on, and it works extremely well having this right at the beginning of the game. Kratos' lines to Atreus feel fitting for what he's trying to teach him, but actually in fact the more you play it, the more you realise that actually these messages that he's telling him apply to Kratos more than anyone else. The line where he says, "Don't be sorry, be better."
I'm sorry.
Do not be sorry. Be better.
Does make sense at the time, but it certainly is a key line that sticks with the two throughout the game. By the end, that line certainly reflects more on Kratos and is a real lesson to show that despite him being a hate-filled character from the previous games, he can change and go from the evil anti-hero from the original trilogy to a hero in this game.
We will be the gods we choose to be, not those who have been. Who I was is not who you be. We must be better.
Having the two attacked at the beginning is a clear indication to show that Kratos isn't the villain here. He is the one who is under threat, and that for me was proof that the game had changed its direction completely and wanted to focus more on how Kratos was now a different and better person. But it wasn't a complete reboot that took away from the original games. One of the things I loved the most about the game was the fact that the lessons Kratos was teaching Atreus, like how to be better, were lines that his father Zeus said to him in the previous games. It showed to me that despite the fact that he killed his father and despised the gods of Olympus, he regretted his actions and wanted to not be that god anymore. And you can really see that in his expressions and the way he delivers lines. This scene right at the end of the game, for example, almost matches the scene with Zeus in the previous game.
The cycle ends here. The cycle ends here. Must be better than this.
And it's an amazing moment to really show off how much Kratos has changed, how he is now the hero who wants better for himself and his son Atreus.
I killed many who were deserving, and many who were not.
And that brings me on to Atreus. Now arguably from a gameplay standpoint, he yet sometimes felt like he was a bit irritating, but from a story point it really made the whole game stand out. To me, the implementation of Atreus helped vocalize Kratos' fight with change. If this sole journey was Kratos finding how he can better himself, the story wouldn't work as well. The fact that Kratos was now a father showed that he had a real responsibility to keep, and anyone who was a kid or even a pet knows that you can't be the person that you were before having them. But to me, Atreus not only showed off Kratos as a father figure, to me it felt like it was Kratos' inner child, a chance to change what had happened in the past. Every situation they go through, Kratos teaches Atreus a lesson, but that lesson doesn't only apply to him, it also applies to Kratos. Channeling anger, being wise in combat, and being better when it comes to interactions with other characters really helps develop them both as characters and solidifies their relationship with each other. Throughout all the story, it's really clear to see that every improvement that happens to the boy means that something in Kratos changes. And by the midpoint of the game where Atreus gets injured and taken out of the game, you can see how much it affects Kratos and how this is the point where he realizes that he needs to be better because he has not only damaged himself, but he has also damaged his son. The whole scene where he goes back to the past is not only one of the best scenes in gaming for me, it really is the turning point of the game and the series as a whole. A point in time where we see the transition from Kratos the God Destroyer from the original trilogy to Kratos, father of Atreus, who sets out to defend his family from the threats of the Norse gods. This line where he states that he is a monster just encapsulates everything the game wants to show you, and to be honest, it really speaks for itself.
Pretend to be everything you are not. Teacher, husband, father. But there is one unavoidable truth you will never escape. You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
I know. But I am your monster no longer.
But the reboot wasn't just effective when it came to the story. Setting the game in a new landscape and new mythology was really a brave moment for the team. Originally it was meant to be set in Egypt and use this Egyptian mythology, but for me I think the Norse world was the perfect choice. Maybe that is because I love Norse mythology and Vikings is one of my favourite shows. But for me, the Norse world is just filled with family stories. It has family against other family members. You have constant betrayals going on and stories about gods becoming better. One of Thor's whole mythological stories, for example, is based on him becoming a better god. I mean, if you have seen the original Thor movie, you know what I'm talking about. All these themes and stories for me just fit what they were trying to do with Kratos' storyline. And even though I don't know too much about Egyptian mythology, for me the Norse mythology is just a perfect setting for that story. On a side note as well, the atmosphere of the Norse world is cold and bleak at times, which again fits with what the game was trying to go for. Everything about this reboot had all the materials needed to just make this game stand out. It put Kratos against the gods once again, but this time made him more of an outsider who was the gods' target and victim. This was a real change, and for me it was for the better, and it made one of the most immersive storylines I have played in a video game in a long time that focused on the betterment of a beloved character who needed to adapt and change for the better. And speaking of immersion, that brings me to the next reason as to why God of War stood out so much.
Father?
No. We do it together. Son.
Just kill that thing, it's not alive anymore. If it's got kids, they're all alone. So think through that. It sucks. I know, right? Use that, okay?
Whenever I write a review, I say the word immersive or immersion so many times throughout the video that maybe it loses a lot of meaning. But I truly believe it is because a lot of good video games completely immerse you in them, and the video game industry is the best at doing that compared to any form of media. You can truly live the character, escape the real world, and get a real feel for the virtual world that they inhabit compared to a film or a TV show. God of War for me was a prime example of how a video game can truly be an immersive experience, and it did this through so many things. To start with, as I mentioned earlier, the Norse world was a perfect setting for Kratos and Atreus and their story. But what made this world stand out so much was how much research had gone into it and how well it represented the Norse mythology. Everything within the world, from its architecture to its enemy designs, fit the mythological stories that had been told and drawn over the many years. The world serpent perfectly encaptured how the Norse people would have seen the world serpent, and its constant looming over the world made you feel like you were enclosed into this area. And although it worked as a sort of invisible wall to stop players going from outside the world, it makes perfect sense within the lore, and visually it's really quite impressive. All the individual worlds, from the Elfland Elfheim to Helheim, even the fire world Muspelheim, all fit the Norse mythology perfectly. They take the existing literature that is out there and transform them into their own creative views of them, and it just makes exploring each area that bit special. They are all completely different from one another and each have their own story to tell, wanting the player to go out and explore them the whole time. The fact that the world tree also shows all of the 9 kingdoms really works well for the setting. A lot of people were confused as to why a lot of the kingdoms were closed off, especially Asgard, but in terms of storyline it makes perfect sense as to why they were completely locked off. But having it on the map means you are constantly aware of what worlds there are in the Norse universe and what worlds have within them. In regards to the storyline as well, I personally thought it was amazing that they not only got the designs of the Norse land perfectly fitting with the folklores and stories, but it was also great to see that they kept true to them as well. Baldur's story, for example, was so perfectly executed and fit the mythology almost to the T. Without going into too much detail, in Norse mythology, Baldur was seen as the perfect god, but his mother was terrified that he was going to die due to a prophecy that she heard. Because of that, she put an invincibility spell on him, meaning that he could no longer be hurt. But his one weakness was mistletoe, as that was the one thing no one expected to be harmful. And because of that, Loki was the one that found out and was the one that inflicted the killing blow with a mistletoe arrow, which would then go on to trigger Ragnarok. Knowing this going into the final boss battle and finding out that his one weakness was the mistletoe arrow is just so damn cool, as it just matches perfectly.
What is that? I can feel this. I can feel everything.
And then to find out that Atreus is Loki and that Ragnarok has been triggered just made it all that more fitting.
My name on the wall. The giants called me Loki?
Loki. That's the name your mother wanted for you when you were born. She must have called you that to her people.
Having this story within the game, one that actually was part of the real mythology, made, for me at least, this game just that extra bit special, and it shows that the writers behind it all really knew the mythology and that they really wanted to immerse you into this world and make you know more about the gods who inhabit it. There was also little things that made the story that bit more immersive. Just from watching the behind the scenes documentary, you see how much chemistry there is between both the actor for Kratos and the actor for Atreus, and because of this you really feel those intimate scenes between them during the game.
I have become everything I never wanted you to be. Run. Run far away from me.
But you have changed. You're not a monster.
That is exactly what I am.
Not to me. You will fail. How you deal with it is what makes you stronger.
It doesn't feel unnatural, it actually feels like they are father and son, and I don't think you would have got that if the voice actors didn't get along and didn't have that initial chemistry. You also have the implementation of the absolutely amazing soundtrack, which is great in its own right, but the fact that the vocal tracks were performed by Icelandic vocalists in the Icelandic language, which is the closest to Old Norse, made the music completely fit the tone of the game. Without this authenticity, it just wouldn't fully immerse you into the Nordic world. Having all these little things like the deep Icelandic vocals playing over important scenes just set the tone perfectly and just add to the amazing story and writing.
It is just the first three notes of the tune, just kind of on a loop. So it just feels very stern. The way that like a stern father would say to his son over and over and over again the same thing. I think there's an element of that in the Kratos theme.
But there was one thing that really stood out to me as a truly immersive feature, and it was certainly something that was heavily discussed when the game first came out, and that for me was the single camera shot throughout the game. Now, as someone who has studied film and loves analysing them, I am a sucker for a well-used single camera shot. One of my favourite scenes of all time in a TV series was the single shot scene in True Detective Series 1. For me, that single shot put you in the shoes of the character, and it helped you feel the tension that was going on within the scene. There was also the episode in the most recent Peaky Blinders series, where it started with a single shot scene, where they are trying to save a certain character's life. It just emphasises tension and it makes more for an immersive experience. Using this in God of War is first of all something that hasn't really been used before in the gaming industry, as it's a massive ask from not only the crew, but the graphical engine. But adding this feature just means that when you have those intimate scenes between Kratos and Atreus early on in the game, and even throughout, you feel like you are with them on this journey. You never feel pulled back from them, and it doesn't even allow them to have their own personal space. Every scene you feel a part of their journey, and if this game contained the standard cinematic cuts from wide shot to mid to close up, it would probably have the same impact, but it doesn't fully tell you the story and you don't get fully immersed in their journey. It was also really nice to have it go from a cinematic moment back into gameplay without a change in graphics or pulling you out from the experience. It's so fluid, and because of that it helps you to keep focused on what is going on and what specific things you should focus on. In fact, the whole cinematography of this game was just spectacular, and I can't say much more than that. I mean, this scene in particular is just incredible. The whole design of God of War is just beautiful. It knows exactly what tone it wants to be. The individual details on the smallest things like enemy designs to its big focus on telling true Norse mythology stories was really quite something. And because of these choices, they really made this game engaging to play through. And speaking of gameplay, sort of, that brings me on to its outstanding gameplay.
My bow!
No! You are not ready! Stay back!
With this game being a reboot, it needed to change pretty much everything from the ground up, including its gameplay and combat. The original games were very linear when it comes to their levels, and its main focus was on its combo building hack and slash nature. But in an industry where the hack and slash genre isn't really as big as it maybe once was, God of War certainly needed to modernise and turn into something that was relevant with the industry now. And I've got to say, going from hack and slash to a third-person, almost Souls-like game was an absolutely fantastic idea. The combat in God of War is just impeccable. Having Kratos bossing around a beautifully designed and brutal-looking axe works so well, not just because of the setting, but just because, well, it just looks cool as fuck. But it really was the feeling of the combat that made the gameplay stand out as unique and really enjoyable. Having the gameplay pause for a frame or two when the axe hits the enemy made every swing and every hit with the axe feel really impactful. You could feel the weight of every attack, and it made you feel like you were hacking into the enemies in front of you. The sound design as well, especially on the bare knuckle punches, added to that brutality. And even though the previous games were much more action-packed, to me, this God of War's combat was much more brutal, especially in the boss battles with Baldur early on in the game. Speaking of boss battles, there was just so much variety to them that it just meant that you couldn't just charge into them, smashing the trigger, constantly hitting them with your axe. There was certainly much more of a Dark Souls tactical focus on it, and it made every encounter that much more interesting. The amount of choice you had as well with your movesets meant that going into combat situations was all about player choice. The implementation of RPG elements made this really a good action RPG game. This was done through the vast choice of Kratos' abilities and the armor sets, which are really quite extensive. As soon as Kratos gets his chains back, the combat just got enhanced, and my god, swinging those chains just felt so incredible and different from the axe. Being real here though, I've never felt weapons in a game that felt so satisfying to use. Honestly, I was like truly blown away at how fun the combat was in this game. But combat wasn't the only thing that had changed. The new open area type design to the world was a nice change in pace and quite fitting for the way most games are going now. As I mentioned earlier, the different worlds are incredibly detailed, but alongside that, the exploration was done so well. There was a perfect balance between combat, storytelling, and exploration. The world had so many things to see and find, from collectibles like lore walls to hidden chests containing materials and different types of loot, and even some fantastic hidden away enemies who you really have to look for. The game doesn't force you to do any of these side quests or any of these hidden objectives, but because of the way the game was designed and the layout of the levels, it just edged you towards wanting to see every little bit of detail, making sure you found everything you possibly could and just immerse yourself in this beautifully designed world. Leaving an area without finding everything for me was just not an option. I truly wanted to find every little thing, not because I'm a massive collector in games, but I just wanted to make sure I hadn't missed out on a really cool room or bit of loot. The other thing that was great about the game's maps design was the fact that it locked off certain areas with things that were clearly something that you could get rid of, but the game never told you how or when you could unlock them. This helped you keep focus and wanting to progress more into the game so you can eventually go back to that area and finally unlock it when you get that specific ability. On top of that, using the axe to puzzle solve was also an amazing mechanic and just made the axe so much more versatile than just a brutal weapon used in combat. Every little thing you do in this game feels like you're working to achieve something. There was not once where it felt like the game was feeling like a chore. Hidden activities were so much fun to find, as were the chests located in all the areas, and the boss battles where you have to pull an enemy through a rift. The Valkyries as well is just another piece of content the game didn't need, but it just added to the experience, allowing players to really test their combat skills to see if they could really take on the most powerful creatures within the game with completely unique movesets. And the same applies to the side missions like the Horde mode in Muspelheim, which again test the player's skills to see if they can get through a variety of different enemies in a certain time limit, getting harder as they progress. This content is stuff that you don't have to do, but it really does reward you well if you are at that top skill, something that games like Mario do all the time, something that doesn't limit the experience but rewards the truly skilled players who do want to see how good they are at games. From the start of the game to the end of the game, there is so much to get engaged with. The combat is just next level, and it's probably some of the most satisfying swords play or axe play I've ever experienced in a game like this. It certainly makes Skyrim's combat feel like absolute shit. But as well as that, the exploration just made going from area to area that much more immersive, and no matter where you go in the game, you got to bet that there is something to find. God of War nailed the pacing of the game and somehow found the perfect combination between combat, storytelling, and exploration that many games get confused by. It made a 30-hour game worth every minute of game time, and as I said earlier, there wasn't a moment in this game where it felt like it was a chore.
He won't stop interfering in my life.
I was just trying to protect you. I've made mistakes. I know. But you're free now. You have what you want. Try to find forgiveness. We can build something new.
I wanted to finish this review on a different note because I feel like I've talked about the things that really meant the most to me about this game. I truly love this game and I feel like it's one of the best I've ever played, and it's in the same boat as The Witcher 3 definitely. But there's more to it than just being a solid game because of its gameplay, exploration, level design and other things. To me, this game showed how passionate the team working behind the game was. Now, I'm not a PlayStation diehard fan, so this isn't me fanboying at all, but after watching the Raising Kratos documentary, it's just so clear to me how much love and passion the team poured into this game. The amount of detail in everything they did is incredible, and Corey's personal connection to the game just made it so much more of a personal journey than any other game that I've ever played. Seeing the actors get really immersed into their roles again shows how good the writing really was. When you can make someone cry on camera, talking about why this specific scene meant so much to him, that just shows you how much passion went into the writing of this game.
You cannot change. You will always be a monster.
I know. A lot of this performance, for me, is a love letter to my kids. It's an apology.
Blood, sweat and tears were literally poured into the making of the game, and seeing how much of a tough situation they were going into making this game, how much stress they were under, wondering if players were going to like the new changes they had made, and working under horrible and impossible looking timeframes, and then seeing the result, it just makes me happy to see how much hard work pays off in the end. The fact that they also improved the graphics from when it was first shown at E3 just shows to me that this game wasn't about just gaining hype for the money. This game was about making the best product possible. Honestly, how many games release a trailer at E3 and then it actually turns out looking that way, or if not better? It's extremely slim, so to see God of War when it came out looking better than its announcement was just mind-blowing. But it wasn't just that, the game was controlled by Sony. This was a massive risk. The studio had to shut down another IP to focus on this game, working for almost 4 years on its design. This showed all the signs of a franchise that could flop at any second and cost Sony and Santa Monica Studios their reputation. But despite that, the team worked on a 30-hour story-driven single-player game that was just phenomenal. They didn't for once think about multiplayer or anything that was trending at the time. They wanted to make a memorable game that meant something to them. That's just so much more commending to me than making another same old game that just wants to jump on the bandwagon of an ongoing trend. There was also no additional monetization things added to the game. There were no boosters, there were no cosmetic additional extras, and there were no loot boxes or anything like that. This game was as traditional as they go, and it was so nice and refreshing to just get the full game straight out of the box with a full story that you could play from start to finish. I know all these things are just points that shouldn't really be made, but honestly the fact that this studio was under threat of being forgotten and taken down, came back, released a solely single player experience that had no season pass or any form of monetization, a game that pushed the boat out in terms of graphics and had a story that was not only memorable and personal for the writers but also the fans, just shows to me that this studio's heart was set on making a real piece of art as opposed to how much money they can make from this release. That for me is one of the reasons why this game means so much to me. It reminds me that there are people out there making games to make people happy and not to scam them out of money, ruining IPs in the process just to make their shareholders happy.
What if I become
God of War is there as a monument to why we love the gaming industry, and for that reason I'm glad this game was such a success, and I am so happy that it did well. Not just because I had a blast playing it, but because I can see how much time and effort went into making this game perfect. The sacrifices the team members went through, missing out on family time and enjoying their personal lives just so they could make a truly immersive game, just makes me feel really proud to have supported this title. And hopefully this video has shown off why I believe this game was truly game changing. Not just for the modern gaming industry, but for the industry as a whole.